So you're thinking about an Italian bike. You're thinking about maybe a custom build. You're thinking about, where do I find some information about these sorts of things? What, man, it's very humid today. Just got myself a nice So Good vanilla almond milk drink. Non-dairy, no animals, no eggs. So hopefully that cools me down. Anyway, back onto our topic for today. And what we're going to basically talk about is custom Italian bikes. You know, these boutique builders that can build bikes for you and to your specifications. How are they built? Are they any good? Why do you want to go through all that hassle of getting a custom bike? Well, we're going to cover all those points today. That's good. Well, I've got a little bit of experience because I was lucky enough to be able to pick up a second-hand Sarto bike. Now, it's actually a Bottecchia ME2, so it's not a Sarto bike, but it was made by Sarto. And I do believe that it is a Dominica, and it was built for the 2013 Pro Team for racing that year. So it's a pro bike. Now, I can give my experience. I've had this bike for quite a long time. I've probably done 40,000 kilometers on the bike. And I have to say it has been a fantastic bike. I don't know what the person, they bought it, if it was an ex-race bike off a team or whatever, but I managed to pick it up second-hand from Elite Racing site. Okay, so what's the difference between buying a giant bike or a Specialized bike or a Merida or any of these other type of bikes that we just see on the floor that have extremely good value compared to some of these custom builds? So what are we getting? Now, the construction style of most of these boutique bikes is quite different. Most of the commercial production bikes are obviously made in some factories in Taiwan or China, and they use what they call a monocoque type construction. And what that means is that the bike is made pretty much in one piece, or maybe two pieces, and maybe one join or two joins, and the carbon is laid up in those molds, and then they use like a balloon that they blow up inside the mold to compress the inside of the fibers and the resin against the mold, and this compaction basically presses all of the air bubbles out of the layers of carbon and resin, because any air bubbles, obviously air is not very strong, and if you have air bubbles it compromises the strength of the bike. And then they bake them, and then your bike's finished, it's painted and finished. Now, most of these other brands that make these custom builds, like Sarto, they don't build their bikes like that. They build their bikes the old-fashioned way, like the old steel frames used to be built. So what they do is they have a jig, and then they have sections of tubing, and they basically put them in the jig and line the jig up so the bike is all square, it's not twisted, everything like that. And then they basically join the pieces together in that jig, okay? Now the Colnago C60 is also built the same. Now why is this any better? You know, is it worse or better? Well, in my opinion, I believe it's better. Now, not because that a monocoque construction is a worse technique. In fact, monocoque construction is a superior technique. But the problem is with the monocoque construction, it's very hard to maintain the quality control because you're relying on a balloon that you can't really control to give even compression inside the tubes. Now, if you look inside or cut them up, you'll see that inside there's lots of wrinkles and little parts where there's too much resin or there's dry carbon or whatever, because you can't you just can't manage that because the balloon's going inside. Now when you make a tube and tube type bike, the difference is that the tubes can be made on a collapsible frame, or as I say, like how can I explain it? It's like, just say I have a tube like this, right? And then I wrap the carbon around it and I put the resin on it, and then this tube can basically collapse inside. So you don't have to compress from the inside. It's compressed from the outside, and you've got a solid surface. So there's none of this relying on a balloon to compress your carbon and resin together. And then basically you just join these tubes like Lego, and then they basically put it in the jig the same, and then it's painted. Why bother buying these bikes? Okay, now the reason why I like this type of construction is because the quality control of the individual components can be maintained much more consistent. Okay, so you don't have to worry about, you know, this balloon doing its job properly. And quite often, in a lot of these bikes, the balloons are half still in there. They use little fillers where they can't get into tight corners. You can imagine trying to make these intricate shapes in bikes in all one mold. How does it ride? You know what? You know how? What's the you know, the feeling of a bike and all this sort of thing? You know. Okay, so when I talk about my Botteccia, I will have to say that the feel of the bike is fairly similar to my Colnago C60. The geometry must not be too far off in the differences between it. They both have this, what I call Italian ride feel, where the bike feels sporty, but it doesn't feel twitchy or do anything that you may not expect it to do. It's almost like riding a docile thoroughbred. Every input it does, but it doesn't do anything you don't expect it to do. And I really like that feel of the Italian bikes. Well, anyway, my two Italian bikes. Now, the Botteccia, I would even say that especially when you're climbing out of the saddle, it feels a little bit more nimble. Now, we're talking about very, very small differences here, but the bike does just seem to want to take off and lurch forward. And it definitely gives you that feeling of something that wants to get up and go. On the flats, it just feels like any other bike, but once you start to get it onto a climb, it really entices you. It feels that little bit more nimble. The Colnago still climbs well, but it just feels like it's just a little bit more of a bike to get up the hill. And when I had these ultralight Reynolds on my Botteccia, man, it just really, really wanted to lurch forwards. Great bike. Unfortunately, I wore those out. I wore my carbon lightweights out, and I've got some Campagnolia wheels on there now, some aluminium wheels, but the bike still does feel very, very natural underneath you. Now, to look at these type of Italian bikes, they look very traditional. They have straight tubes, and if you actually go and do any research on bike design, they'll actually tell you that round tubes, straight tubes are the best way to build a bike. All this bendy tubes and all these fancy things they put in the forks and the seat stays and everything, it's all just marketing. A bike frame, there's one way to make a bike, and that's with straight tubes, and especially the down tube. The bigger the diameter of the down tube, the more rigid it is. And you can actually see this. The Colnago does this, and also the Sarto bikes do this. And you really feel it. The bike is very rigid. And the other thing that Sarto does with their bikes is they wrap their bikes in 3K carbon. Now, my bike's wrapped in 3K carbon, my Botteccia, and man, it's rigid. This is the only downside to this bike. It really does feel the road buzz. If you're riding a long ride, it can be quite fatiguing. It feels the road imperfections to a considerable degree. It's really, really rigid bike. So if that's what you're after, if you're after something that's an enduro type bike, the Dominica is just not for you. Okay, you go on about price. Now, I'm not too sure what they market for, a brand new Sarto frame markets for in Australia, but my Colnago was about 6,000. I do think the Sarto frames may be a little bit more, maybe about 6.5, maybe 7,000 for a frame. Now you go, okay, whoa, that's pretty pricey. I can buy, a giant, with Ultegra on for that sort of money straight out the box. You go, yeah, you can, but I don't believe that it is the bike that you get if you buy a Sarto bike. Sarto bike is a really premium product, and it's really built in a premium way with the best carbon. Now, if you look at some of the other brands, especially the American type brands now, Specialized and Cervelo, the prices are really getting crazy. And this is where I think that these boutique bikes are actually becoming a lot more competitive. You go, yes, the frame is expensive, but you could buy an Ultegra group set or a Campagnolo Chorus group set or a SRAM Force group set, and you can use aluminium handlebars and whack your favorite seat on there with an aftermarket seat post, because these bikes to use generic seat posts, and you could build that bike up to probably about 10 grand, maybe 11 grand for a really premium bike. And you're paying more than that now for some of these Cervelos and Specialized. I think the new Cervelo is something like between 16 and 17,000, and you really go, hang on a sec, this bike's made in the Far East, and I've got a bike here that is made by the people that own the business, and it has the best different layers of carbon in it, and it's the same bike that is raced at the pro level. So I think that they're actually becoming quite competitive in that sort of middle to upper end limit, but not the all out limit. And the reality is that group sets like Chorus, Ultegra and SRAM are as good as the top echelon of group sets. In fact, I'd probably maybe even argue they're better, because to get that little extra weight out of the top group sets, they do tend to skimp on the parts a little bit, and they're a little bit more fragile. The great thing about a tube and tube construction or a tube and lug construction is the way you can build the bike is endless. You can build it to any geometry you like. So you can have a bike at home that's a giant or a Specialized or something that you've had or something that you rode 20 years ago that you love the geometry of, and they can build that bike exactly the same geometry. It's not like, oh, there's 4 sizes available: small, extra small, medium, large. It's infinite. The size adjustments are infinite, and if you're one of these people who has longer arms or you got longer legs, you can have that bike made to fit you. You can order those bikes. Whilst if you go to Trek or Specialized or Giant, it's like, oh yeah, but we need to fit you onto a medium, we need to fit you onto large, we have to play around with the head step, oh, we've got to put some spaces in, blah 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 blah. Should you do a custom build? Well, I can't answer that question for you. All I can do is tell you that I've had a bike that's been built by a boutique bike builder, and I've been very, very happy with it. I mean, it's my second bike now because I bought a Colnago C60, but every time that I have a little bit of a rain down, I get back on my Botteccia, it does feel really nice. And you sort of go, geez, is this bike better than my Colnago? And the Colnago C60 is a beautiful bike. So it is a really nice machine, and you need to decide whether you want to go through the hassle of a custom build. Now, custom builds are a little bit of a, well, they're not a nightmare, but it's like building a house. Every little piece you need to work out, and there's an extra cost. You just get a frame, and you've got to work out what wheels you want on it. You've got to work out what handlebars you want on it, how wide are the handlebars, what stem length you want, all this sort of stuff. So it is a little bit more of a mucking around. It doesn't just come out of a box and you just put it together. And it will take some time for the frame to come. With my Colnago, I think it took about 6 weeks, but I do believe that that might have been one off the shelf. But yeah, that is the downside. You can't go into the shop and you can't ride out on the bike on the same day. So that's just something you need to think about. And you may need to actually wait for certain bits and pieces you want. Like if you want a specific seat post, or you want a specific type of handlebars, or whether you want a carbon one or an aluminium one, how much do you want to spend on that part? All those things you need to make a decision on. So they're the pros and cons for buying a boutique bike. I would seriously encourage you to go and speak to your local bike shop or your local dealer about it, because I do think that once you get that bike and you get everything made to fit you, when you ride that bike out, it just feels so much more like you bought something, like you put a suit on, and instead of it being a hire suit, it's a suit that you had made, and you put it on and you do the buttons up, and it just closes that coat perfectly as the button just fits and does up, and you go and you feel like $1 million when you're wearing it. Okay guys, well that's my vid for the day. Hope you managed to order your new custom Italian machine and enjoy it, and I hope you got something out of my review here. If you need any more information about Sarto bikes, or you want a specific question you want to ask about the bike that I have, just leave your comment down below. Okay then guys, have a good day, see you, bye.